Welcome back, everyone, to yes, I looked it up, 15th episode of Blue Collar, White Collar, with me, your host, Kieran, and my co-host, Nicholas Wheeler Hughes. How you doing, Nick?
I'm great. I'm just wondering when you're going to start either saying your last name in the introduction or removing my last name because you can't be Kieran when I'm Nicholas Wheeler Hughes.
I absolutely can, because I'm the one who edits this show, and I can cut it out.
Damn, this is true. Too much power.
So this month, we are going to be talking about firearms, and kind of the reason that I decided to pick this topic is because October is generally the month where hunting season starts, at least in where we live in Canada, deer season specifically, which is the most popular form of hunting as far as I know. And so we're going to see what we think. Nick's probably going to take a much more restrictive position than I am, and hopefully we're not at each other's throats and wanting to use said firearms by the end.
And just fire it and then realize that we've just broken our devices. Done nothing to the other person.
And all of a sudden we can cost ourselves hundreds of dollars. Yeah.
Indeed. No, I'm excited for this one. I think I'm more curious to kind of understand your take, your position on guns, and I'm sure we'll drift into comparing kind of Canadian gun laws and American gun laws. When is it right to carry firearms? What laws make sense? And also just very keen to talk about the culture around guns. I'm coming from a very urban perspective, obviously, where hunting is not a thing. While Kieran lives in a place where you see deer on your lawn all the time.
But interestingly enough, you say that basically means that they can't be hunted where I live, because you need to be, I believe it's 400 feet from a house to operate a firearm. Now, I could probably shoot them with a bow, but we're not talking about bows today. We're talking about firearms.
That'll be next month, is actually the politics around bow and arrows.
Not likely. So I'll start out by stating that I'm a firm believer that firearms should be something that is protected as a right. Not a right to have them, but like not every person should have a gun. But if you want to be able to purchase and own a firearm, you should have the right to do so, with the exceptions of if you have been convicted of a violent felony. There are certain felonies that, if you laundered money, like I don't give a shit about that. Because I think it's an important part of self-defense and also anti-tyranny. If you look at countries that devolve into tyranny, one of the many steps that they take is they remove firearms from the general population, and then they can't fight back. So when the secret police come to your door, what do? You're screwed because they have a monopoly on force. And I don't think the state should have a monopoly on force.
Interesting. That is probably the fundamental difference between the U.S. and Canada, which is that in the U.S., carrying a firearm is a constitutionally afforded right, where the Second Amendment the right to carry and bear arms, if I'm not mistaken. And that is a huge part of American culture, right? American identity is tied to guns. And you have the NRA.
They have more guns than people.
Sorry?
They have more guns than people.
They have over 400 million guns in the United States.
And I would like some of them.
We I think, have one gun for every 5 people. Canada. That was the stat that I saw recently. And most of those are probably concentrated with, people who own many guns, right?
Yeah. For example, my grandfather, when he was a hunter, he had a handful multiple guns. So most people, like a lot of people will own one, but then you have your groups of people who have 4 or 5, and that's pretty normal in the hunting community, because if you're hunting birds, you're not going to use a rifle to hunt birds. And you want different sizes of rifles for hunting different animals and in different types of terrain. If you're in the bush, you want a more powerful gun that can, potentially go through some branches. And then whereas if you're in a field, you want something that will fire a longer distance. So it's when you're an avid hunter, you're going to own multiple different kinds of firearms, and that's mostly concentrated in shotguns and rifles. In Canada, handguns are classified as a restricted, which means that you need a special license to get them. To obtain a firearm in Canada, you need the Possessions and Acquisitions License, which allows you then to purchase ammunition and also certain types of firearms, mainly shotguns and rifles, whereas you need specific permission from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police to obtain the Restricted Possessions and Acquisitions License, which would then allow you to buy handguns until it was put in effect by the Trudeau government to freeze all sales of firearms, of handguns in Canada. After, what year was it, 2023, there was a shooting, and so you can't even purchase those now, which I think is a crime against humanity.
How is that a crime against humanity?
Well, any violation of a people's rights by a government is a crime against humanity. If the government is violating your rights, that's a crime, and it's against a mass populace of people. It's a crime against humanity.
I don't know.
Look, they're not slaughtering us.
Crimes against humanity are often associated with war crimes.
Sure.
Crimes of the highest scale, right? When a government is slaughtering its own people, right? It's often a precursor to genocide.
Well, there's a word that I'll even use to debunk you, well, not debunk, but refute you, is the term genocide is typically associated with the mass extinction of a people, or attempted, but it is a much more broad term that encompasses many things, such as the removal of a people from an area, or the forced assimilation of a people and removal of their culture, such as what Canada did to the Native Americans, which they would not have been able to do had those people had firearms and been able to defend themselves from said government.
If only the indigenous people had had a fucking bunch of AK-47s.
You said the greatest crime that the Canadian government has ever committed was the residential schools where they took
Absolutely.
Native American children, or whatever term you think is most politically correct, Nicholas, away from their own parents and put them into schools. If the government attempted to do that to my child and I had the right to bear arms, they would not succeed while I'm still alive.
Okay. That's a bit of a rabbit hole that I'm not gonna go down. I think that's just like a weird hypothetical. We can talk about a people's ability to defend themselves a bit later. But I think if I may,
It's your show too.
Start with like each of our like philosophies on guns broadly, and then kind of try to find areas where we agree, areas where we disagree, and then I'd like to just talk a bit about the U.S. And take it from there. I'm very anti-gun, unsurprisingly. I am not a believer in the idea that the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun, which is an argument that I hear a lot of people make. I think that more guns make people more unsafe. That is fundamentally what I believe. I look at countries that have similar gun laws to us, Western nations like, those several in Europe, Australia, New Zealand, like there are very, very tight regulations around guns. And what we see as a result is that gun deaths or homicides with guns are extremely low.
Sure, homicides.
Compare that to the United States, that has the single highest rate of guns per people of any developed nation, and you look at the rate of their gun deaths, whether it be suicide, homicide, or other, as in like accidental deaths. It's many times higher. And so fundamentally, my belief is that I'm not saying no one should have guns. I am glad that the police have guns. I think obviously hunters need guns, so long as they're hunting for food and not for sport. I'm not a believer in killing animals for fun. But overall, good night. Overall, I'm a believer that more guns makes us more unsafe, and that less guns makes us safer.
Okay, so obviously, if a population is not allowed access to firearms, there is going to be less firearm deaths. But that does not mean that there will be less homicides as a result of other things. If you look at countries like the UK, there has been a massive amount of knife crime where people are being stabbed. So the fact that guns exist, and yeah, obviously there's going to be more gun deaths because they're there. The United States, it is different about relative to the other nations you're referring to is those European nations have a very monoculture society, so the people get along for the most part. Whereas you look at the United States, they have a lot of different cultures, and there's a lot of different culture clashes that go on, and so you have a lot more problems with violence than those countries do, except now with the influx of Middle Eastern populations into these European nations, where now there is a massive amount of crime that is happening, knife crime, rapes, and other such things going on, which I think would be preventable if the population was allowed access to firearms. Nick, you have sisters. If one of your sisters is working, or perhaps they're just out for an evening, and they are accosted by a gentleman, well, not a gentleman, a very bad man who wants to do them harm, what is the best way for them to be able to fight back? The ultimate tool that will level the playing field from them is a firearm. If he has a knife and she has a knife, I'm sorry, the big man is going to win. But if she has a firearm and he has a firearm, it comes down to luck and training. And hopefully, she has enough training that she comes out on top. And I think that's one of the reasons that's a crime against humanity for the government to prevent its population from having firearms for self-defense.
So just to be clear, are you suggesting that my sisters should carry guns whenever they go out?
I think that if they want to be as safe as possible in a large city like you live in, where there is much crime, a firearm is the best way to virtually guarantee their safety. Yes.
So all women should carry guns when they go out?
I think they should train with firearms so that they are proficient, so that when it comes time to use them, they do not hesitate, know the laws, and use it when it is appropriate. That is the way that they will be the safest against men who choose to do them harm. Yes.
Okay. Well, in this world that you're describing, the men probably also have guns.
Potentially.
Because it sounds like they're very easy to get.
No, not if they have a felony on record, which most men who would commit such violence against a woman likely already has a felony on record, and therefore would likely need to obtain firearms illegally, which is an added step that would be more difficult in order to obtain. Whereas if none of them have guns, you can just go and buy a knife at the store. Everyone can have access to a knife. And then he has more power than her simply because he has a weapon.
Luckily, and you said Montreal has a lot of crime.
Relative to where I live, that's for sure.
Yes, but it actually doesn't at all compared to pretty much everywhere in the U.S. There's very little crime in Montreal. My sisters, 29 and 24 respectively, have never been in a situation where they needed a gun to defend themselves from a man who is accosting them, attacking them. I don't really know other women that have ever expressed a wish to have a gun where they would have used that gun to wound, kill the person, the man attacking them. It just sounds to me as though you're kind of offering me this scenario and saying, wouldn't it be great if?
Yes.
But my counter to you is you have just created a society in which it is far easier to acquire guns, where guns are just more prominent, and therefore I think violence becomes more prominent because they are violent weapons, right?
Guns are no more violent than knives. A gun sitting here is not going to commit violence. It's the person who is wielding the tool that has the violent intent that is going to commit violence. Is it the Swedes or the Swiss? It's the Swiss, I believe, have a large amount of guns, but they do not have a large amount of crime, mainly because they have a monoculture society that is a very peaceful people.
Can you tell me whether in the UK, which is where I think you were talking about knifing incidents, can you tell me whether that is at all comparable to the amount of violent gun incidents in the United States?
I have no idea what the rates are, but that doesn't matter. When someone has violence done upon them, they should be allowed to defend themselves with whatever means necessary. I don't care what. You're comparing apples to oranges. The United States' culture is not the same as the UK's culture. They're very different. As I said, the United Kingdom had for a long time a fairly monocultured society where they're very peaceful people and they didn't have a lot of crime. The United States has always had a lot of crime, which I actually associate to the government oppressing their people, such as the war on drugs and, racism, that police brutality and other such things. So they're completely different things. You can't compare Canadians to South Africans in terms of our cultures and whether or not we're going to have similar levels of violence. You have to find areas that have similar levels of violence and then compare, do these people have guns or not, and is self-defense more prevalent in those areas or not?
So are you saying that the solution to violence is just not letting, it's like immigration policy?
In certain aspects it is.
Towards Arab nations?
I think in Europe that would have helped what's going on currently there right now. I do not think that is the problem that the United States suffers from. Currently in Europe, I do think that is one of the main issues there, but that is not the main issue everywhere. The United States has had much violence for a long time. It has nothing to do with Arabs coming into their country. There's a long time that they've had violence. Then you look at the south side of Chicago or Baltimore or Los Angeles or New York. These places have always had large amounts of crime, at least since the turn of last century. In the 1900s, they've had large amounts of crime. It's not the same. You can't compare the two. They're completely different. You'd have to compare states within the same country. And even then, that's difficult because those states, like in the United States, they have different laws that make the cultures in those areas different. I think we should move on because it's really not. Comparing different countries is not productive in any way.
Right. I don't think it's fair for you to say that guns are not the only way to be violent. Look at the UK, where there are lots of knife deaths or stabbings, and to say that, you know, a more violent people will find ways to commit violence regardless of the tools at their disposal.
What is wrong with that statement?
I largely reject that statement for a couple reasons. One, I am absolutely certain that while there may be a rise in knife attacks in the UK, that wouldn't surprise me at all. So I believe you. I don't think it gets anywhere close to the rate of violence, gun violence specifically, that we see in the US. That's why I asked for the comparison. I don't think it's close. I've never heard a story about a disillusioned, angry young man running into a school and killing a bunch of people with a knife. Guns allow for school shootings, right? And we see that those happen all the time in the United States. I think something like 500, over 500 children have died from school shootings specifically since the year 2000. I know that gun deaths are the highest cause of death among children aged 1 to 19 in the United States. I know that in Canada, a total of 11 children have died ever from school shootings. And I think that when you have, and I hear what you're saying about being more restrictive, and we're not just going to allow anyone to get guns in the way that, you know, many states in the U.S. you can just walk into a Kmart and buy a gun.
That's actually not true, but
right, and that's ridiculous. And I don't think you agree with that either. But my point is that fundamentally, and you can argue immigration, I largely reject that argument. You can argue that there are other factors, right? Monoculture versus having different cultures, and clash of cultures increases violence. Like, oftentimes violence is committed within a community, not one community attacking another community. Like, you think about violence in the U.S., a lot of it is gang violence, right? We know that is extremely prominent in the U.S. But fundamentally, you are safer when there are no guns, right? And let's go back to your example here about my sisters. For one thing, I think that we, you know, generally have good education around, you know, just managing creepy guys in bars. The fact that they don't have guns makes them safer, where they cannot simply kind of walk up and pull a gun on a woman and say, let's take a walk outside. My sisters just have not been in that situation, which I'm very grateful for. So I don't agree at all, and I think that that we are lucky to live in a country like Canada, where owning a gun is a very difficult thing to do.
So I do think that it should be somewhat restrictive on the ability to purchase a firearm, but you are incorrect that you can just walk into any Kmart, which I don't even know if that's still a thing, to purchase a firearm. Every firearm that is sold by a institution runs a FBI background check to see if that person has any kind of criminal history. It doesn't take long. It takes a few minutes. And there have been issues where things have not come up that should have come up. I'll give you that. For the number one leading cause of deaths in the United States for children 1 to 19, you already gave the answer to why that is. It's gang violence. If you cut gang violence out of the equation, that's not the case anymore. And I don't see...
Prove that. Where,
I'd have to go find the statistics. Gang violence
But
is
you can't just
is
say that,
the gang violence
all of a
is
sudden-
is absolutely the leading cause of the sheer number of gun deaths that happens in the United States, because Chicago in one weekend had like 83 murders, and most of that was gang violence. The vast majority of that was gang violence. Anyway, continuing on to what I was going to say, that situation that you played out with your sister in a bar and a person with a firearm, there is nothing that is different in that situation than if they had a knife. The exact same situation could play out. So I reject that as an argument, because a knife could do the exact same thing. And you cannot restrict knives, which they actually have been trying to do in the UK and Australia, because there are so many knife crimes that are being committed, which is absurd. So I reject that as an argument, just out of hand.
Okay, well, we disagree, and that's fine. I don't think that there's any way that you can argue against more guns equals more violence. I think that just fundamentally that is true. Obviously, you need to have other systems in place to protect people, right? That a person is not responsible, should not be responsible anyway, for their own security.
I
They live in
disagree completely.
where they pay taxes. You have a police force that exists to protect people, right? Now, I'm not saying that the police can suddenly be anywhere at any given time, but I'm saying that, you know, the state has an obligation to protect its people, right? And you protect them not just through police, but through surveillance, right? You have security in places, and you are ensuring that violence is harder to commit, right? And that if you do commit violence, you're going to get caught, and there are going to be serious consequences. Whereas, you know, you look at the United States, you look at police brutality against especially black people, right? Like, and how many of those police officers have gotten off scot-free, right? After that. So we in Canada, I think, are lucky to have a system that, for the most part, protects people. I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm not saying it can't be improved. But we regulate guns. We have guns as a privilege and not a right. And I think it's a good thing.
So, as I said, I completely disagree. When it comes down to it, the only person that is truly responsible for your safety is you. The police are a passive deterrent on crime. They are not an active deterrent on crime. If someone were to kick your door in right now, the police would never make it to protect you before they found your corpse.
That's right.
The one thing that could protect you
Fair.
would be if you had some form of defense where someone is coming at you and you can stop that from happening, which would be, in most cases, to assure that you don't get in a situation where your life might come out on top of another, or maybe both die, like in a knife v knife, would be if they kick in your door and charge you with a knife and you blow them away. And which is obscene that we are not allowed to use firearms for self-defense in Canada at all. We're allowed self-defense. If someone breaks into your home and assaults you, you're allowed to fight back. You may be charged, but you will likely be found not guilty unless you use a firearm. If you use a firearm in Canada for self-defense, you will be found guilty. Which, to me, it baffles me, because it's the only assurance, it's the best assurance. It's not a guarantee, but it's the best
So should
way
every home have a gun in it?
Every home that has a person who has done training in order to properly understand how to use said firearm should have a firearm. If you don't know how to use a gun, don't buy a gun. Learn how to use a gun, then buy a gun, so that you can protect yourself.
I should not have a gun.
You should not have a gun if you do not know how to use it. If you don't know where the safety is on your gun, if you don't know how to clean your gun, if you don't know proper technique of where to point your gun.
But then you would say, then go get the training, right?
Go get your training.
So then everyone should go and get their training and then own a gun.
Correct.
That's ideal for you?
with certain restrictions. As I said, violent felons should not be allowed to, and minors should have extended restrictions upon them. I do think that, and you can in Canada, I'm pretty sure, possess firearms as a minor for hunting purposes. You need special, I don't remember exactly what it is, but there are special exceptions and special rules, but they're exclusively used for hunting as well. Yeah, I think every person who, especially someone who has a family, I have a wife and a son and another child on the way. And if someone comes into my home, I don't care what the law is. I will use whatever means necessary I have to defend my family, even if I have to go to jail, even if I have to die. And I don't want to. So I would prefer to have a firearm that I can then defend my family with.
And look, I'm not saying that in an isolated context, if someone is trying to break down my door and I have a family, would I rather have a gun? Of course. I'm not suggesting that I wouldn't. And if I was a person that was, that other people wanted to break my door down and hurt me and kill me, then I might think about getting a gun. But luckily, I and you and pretty much everyone we've ever met has never been in a situation where someone is trying to break down their door and kill their fucking family.
Luckily.
But I think that this is a very classic argument that people, in the NRA, Republicans in the United States use, right? Which is, hey, here's a specific situation where would you rather have a gun or not have a gun? And I think it's easy to say, well, I'd rather have a gun. But I think if you zoom out and if you understand that guns are a much more systemic decision that governments have to make, fundamentally, every stat that we have points to the fact that less guns equals less violence. Right?
I disagree. So those are correlations. They're not causations.
Your argument that there should be a gun in every home, I think that there are not...
in every trained home of a non-felon.
Kill us. I think that what we know is that it is far more likely that a child gets into that gun locker, right? Like, school shootings often happen where the child is using their parents' gun, right? So it's like, let's say, fast forward, I have a gun in a gun locker, and I'm trained with my gun. Great, I'm doing exactly what you want me to do. But guess what? My son, who's getting bullied at school, and he's 16 years old, knows the code because he somehow watched me open it one time, and I was careless, and he knows the code to my gun locker. One day, he goes into my gun locker, takes my gun, and goes and murders 30 of his classmates.
So
that is a story that we have heard time and time again in the United States where this exact situation, the one that you're talking about, exists. Does that ever happen in Canada? No.
So, this is actually an area where we will have some agreement on, and I will touch on something that you have incorrect there. So, yes, they may be able to get into the safe. However, bullets and a firearm are not legally allowed to be stored together unless the firearm has an additional lock on it. So a trigger lock, or rifles, you pull out the firing pin and you put a lock in it that way. So, which is why I think keys are typically better than a code. You can pick locks sometimes, but the additional restriction.
Or your kid can get the key.
Well, you should have the key. As the only trained member in your household with the ability to use a firearm, you should have the key on you at all times. Not somewhere where you're...
sleep with it in my pocket. I should shower with it.
You should know where that key is at all times. Yeah, you might not have to sleep with it, okay? But you should keep track of it. When you go to leave your house and you take your car keys, it should be on there. You should know that it's there. And let me continue on, because I think there's a point of agreement that we can have here. I think that there should be decent restrictions on how you store guns in Canada. A lot of Americans just have a gun in their bedside table, and as a result, there are unintentional deaths caused by children who gain access to these guns. That's a horrible thing, and you're right, that is never seen in Canada because of the ways that we are legally allowed to store weapons. I think that's a good thing. I have no problem with
I'm glad.
I have no problem with the requirement of having proper safety precautions around the storage of firearms. I think that's a good thing. And additionally, on the situation that you put forth, I think parents should absolutely be legally liable for the actions of their child with their firearms. Unless someone has broken into your house and broken into your safe and taken your gun, what happens with your gun is your responsibility. And I think you can agree with me on that, at least. You wanted to find agreement.
Absolutely.
There's a place that we can find agreement.
The parents of a child, of a young adolescent who has committed a school shooting, absolutely have responsibility for multiple things, but first and foremost, not ensuring that their child doesn't have access to that gun.
But guess what? Most of these mass shootings were committed with rifles, which is something that teenagers would theoretically have access to here in Canada. I had access to rifles when you and I knew each other in high school. I could have done something horrible with them. I wouldn't, because that's not the type of person I am. But I had access to rifles. So what would stop me with the current laws that are in Canada? Nothing. The United States, they're just a crazy bunch of people who are more willing to commit violence against each other. Again, I think that a massive amount of it comes down to the culture of people, not the regulations around firearms. I think the culture is a massive, massive influence on how violent people are willing to be, and therefore, when they have access to firearms, they are able to do lots of damage. But lots of damage is still able to be done with other things that you can easily go into a crowd of people and stab several of them in quick succession and before you're caught. But you could do the same thing with a firearm. So I don't know. You could also build a bomb and cause damage.
Yeah. I hear you. I do agree that culture is a factor. I think that we in Canada are a more peaceful people, a more compassionate people, a people that feel a stronger sense of solidarity, and that you look at the polarization in the United States, it is much worse than it is here. Although not to say it doesn't exist here.
Damn liberals!
In the United States, they are also a gun-loving people.
Say hello to my little friend!
Right? They love guns. It's not just about owning guns, it's about going to gun shows and and this is obviously particularly in red states, although not exclusively in red states, but Texas is obviously the state that comes to mind when you think about guns. Where they have open carry laws, right? You can walk around with a pistol on your hip like a good old school cowboy.
I know, it's awesome.
That's cool, right?
And guess what? Texas has less gun crime than blue states. This whole thing, earlier in the conversation, you said you don't believe this whole thing of the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is with a good guy with a gun. You do believe that. You just believe that good guy is a police officer. How else do you stop them?
I do largely agree that police are more of a, what was the term that you used? Dissuading, preventative. Yeah. Force.
Preventative and reactionary.
I will note that a lot of gang violence happens in specifically LA, Chicago, and New York, right, which are blue
Baltimore
cities in blue states. So I suspect that's probably where that stat comes from, if it's true, and I'm not suggesting it isn't, although...
And look, on this podcast, we don't lie to each other. We both assume that we are telling the truth based off of the information that we have seen. So thank you for not believing I'm lying to you.
Yeah, well, I believe that you've seen something that has put that, like, I will sometimes call into question sources, but it wouldn't surprise me when you look, if places like California and New York have high levels of gun deaths. However, I wonder what happens when you remove gang violence from that equation, right? When you have more, regular citizens going about their days. I bet you that the places that have more guns have more gun violence.
So
I would bet anything on that being true.
You may be right about that. So this is actually an interesting fact that I believe it was in Montreal. I could be wrong though. When Canada, our police force went around and we ended up locking up large amounts of the Hells Angels, which is the biker gang that is Canada based. What ended up happening was violent crime against ordinary people actually went up because the organized crime of the Hells Angels kind of restricted the violence to other areas, and what happened was junkies and random criminals knew that because the Hells Angels were locked up, they could get away with hurting the ordinary person. It's kind of a weird, backwards thing. So I really don't know what would happen, and American gangs like in Chicago and LA and Baltimore, that's not the same as the Hells Angels.
Crips and the Blood.
Nick, you're like the third whitest person I know.
I don't know anything about the Crips and the Bloods.
Red and blue, but I couldn't tell you which one. No, you know what? The Bloods are red.
The Bloods are red, yeah. And they do this thing, hold on, can I do it? You can write blood with your fingers.
Oh. Yeah, see.
Have you never seen that?
See, I'm the second whitest person I know, so.
Okay, yeah.
Look at me. Look at this camera. Look how pale I am.
Anyway, okay. Good. Do you want to talk about...
I'd like to talk about our experiences with guns, because this is one thing that I kind of have an issue with, is that oftentimes people who don't have a lot of experience with guns want to legislate guns. People who've never actually used them decide that they're dangerous, and oftentimes those people, especially the actual elites, are protected by guns. So I would like to just talk about our experience with guns, because,
Is it like men regulating abortion?
Kind of. You could make that argument for sure.
I do make that argument.
Fair enough. You have to admit, guns are fun. There's a reason we watch action movies. I'm going to cut to a clip right now.
Yeah. Here we go. Say hello to my little friend. Yeah, that's good.
Guns are so much fun. Like the fact that there's a tiny explosion going on right in your hands that launches a projectile so fast that it will explode things. I mean, typically it's like explode things like a pumpkin or whatever, but which I have done. It gives you a certain rush of adrenaline that it's a great experience. So Nick, do you want to tell us? I mean, I already showed them the.
Well, you just showed the clip, I assume.
I plan on it, and I'm going to have cut to it multiple times already by now.
Yeah. No, you can't do that. You can't. Every time I make an argument, you're just going to cut to that.
Anytime you make an anti-gun argument, I'm just going to cut to it. People shouldn't have guns.
No, I agree with you, and like, I'm not saying guns aren't fun. Like, for one thing, I have watched tons and tons and tons of action movies.
There's a reason that John Wick is as popular as it is.
John Wick is awesome. there's nothing like a great movie, like Die Hard is one of my favorites, right? Where you just got this awesome hero, usually a guy, but more and more women who just are heroes, right? And they go and they take out the bad guys who also have guns, and it reinforces this narrative of a good guy with a gun. We want to have good guys with guns around because look at what they do. They protect us. They take out the bad guys. I myself have fired guns before. Only on one occasion, admittedly, and it was that clip that you just saw. For context, this was probably 3 years ago. I think it was the end of 2022, if I'm not mistaken. And my family was up in, well, I should say down in Maine, where my grandfather and his second wife live. His second wife, my grandfather's second wife, so my step grandmother.
I'm pretty sure you don't have to say second, unless he's currently also married to his first wife.
Well, it's relevant because
Okay.
his second wife has her own children. So they're not really my aunts and uncles, but one of these children, Henry. Sorry that I'm name dropping you, Henry.
You didn't say his last name, so we're good.
But Henry, kind of Uncle Henry, who was around for Christmas, and one day, after probably December 26th or 27th, he looks at my cousin and I. My cousin William's a few years younger than I am, and he kind of looks at us and he goes, "You guys want to go shoot guns?" And we
Yes.
go, yeah. And it was funny because when we got back, my dad was who was away for the day, golfing or something, and he was like, "Wait, what? You went without me?" But it was a blast, right? We go and we had 3 different guns. I think I shot 2 pistols, and then I shot an automatic weapon.
Something you cannot get in Canada.
Which you can't get in Canada, absolutely.
Or nor the
And
pistols anymore.
You feel powerful. I think I was super shocked by the force of it. It pushes you back, right? So you really got to plant your feet. But we weren't really aiming at anything. We were just kind of shooting into dirt and piles of
Dirt mounds.
yeah. But no, it was a lot of fun, and I was happy to do it. Right, my Uncle Henry is a gun lover and owns, I think, 20 guns or something.
I'm gonna have to go talk to Henry.
His daughter, I should mention, has very poor eyesight. And so we've always kind of worried about that. But yeah, nothing has ever happened that I know of related to any kind of gun incident or gun violence with Henry, but it could. And I think the point that I'm trying to make is that yes, guns can be fun. Yes, in isolated situations, a good guy with a gun. I would rather have a gun if someone's breaking into my home. But fundamentally, I think that more guns, as I say, equals more violence. And I would happily sacrifice that experience of shooting guns if it were to save one life.
Well, yeah, sure. That's just one experience. But anyway, I'm not going to get
Tell
it.
us about your experience with guns.
So as much as I am now a country boy, I was not born and raised a country boy. I was raised in the city. So I very much had very similar agreements with you on guns up until I moved out to the country with my stepfather and my mother in about 2010. And that's when I started. It wasn't immediately that we started getting into that we started going hunting together, but it was shortly after, and we purchased firearms, or he had purchased firearms, and So I've used a few different types of guns. I've used 270. I used a 30-06 lever action, which is I wish I could get one of those. They're so much fun. I even have a bullet, just a single bullet here that I kept. And I've also fired shotguns and done some bird hunting. And there is a magical thrill that you get operating using a firearm, and it's something that you have to really respect because they can cause damage in ways that you won't even realize. If you accidentally discharge your firearm up in the air, it could come back down and hit someone so far away that you wouldn't know about it until you hear about it. A bullet going up is just as fast coming back down, only now it's however far away, so you have to be very careful, which is why training is so important. Knowing your acts prove, as they call them they might have changed that in the 10 years since I did the course, but it's important because it's proper safe procedure for using a firearm. It's very, it's not a lengthy course. It was like 2 days that we did before you can get your firearm certification, which is not your PAL. You have to get the certification to use firearms before you can even buy a deer license. And then you have to get your possessions and acquisitions license after you would have your firearm certification. So it's a very lengthy process to actually purchase firearms in Canada, which is one of the ways that Canada has attempted to prevent gun crime, which Nick is very happy about. So I love shooting guns. Most of my friends that I was able to bring up to our farm, I tried to convince. I even got my wife, who, Nick, you've met my wife. She's a very quiet, timid person. I got her to fire a 22, which is another firearm that we had, was a 22, single-shot 22. And then we had a 22 that also had a magazine on it. Don't remember how many shots that could hold, but it's so much fun. Even she had fun doing it. So firearms are one of those things that until you've experienced it, you'll never understand. I mean, you kind of get it because you watch action movies and like guns ablaze and it's so cool. But you really have to have a certain amount of reverence for them, which is why I say that you should have proper training before you operate a firearm, before you own a firearm, which is, in my view, so one of the things that I think you talked about earlier was kids who are being bullied at school causing school shootings. And I think it's quite obvious that those kids are, they have low self-confidence. And so one of the things that I think helps with that is mastering something. Being good at something really helps you from having low self-confidence, because you can actually go, no, look, I can do things. I can do something cool, whether that's building things or, even like being really good at art or being really good at music. When you have something that you know you can do and you can do it well, it's a lot harder to have the kind of self-esteem problems that will lead you down the rabbit hole of committing violence against other people. Sometimes people are depressed, but usually depressed people commit violence against themselves, which is quite unfortunate. If you are having thoughts of suicide, please contact someone and talk about it. But I think these kids who would go out and commit violence with these guns that are clearly their parents, usually their fathers, if they had proper training and mastered their firearms and did it semi-regularly, I don't think they would go out and cause such types of violence against people, because they would understand the reverence that you have to have, the respect you have to have, the responsibility that it is owning a firearm. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. I don't know. What do you think, Nick?
I so disagree, Kieran. I so disagree with you.
Up until that last, how do you disagree with that? You don't think that kids who are more confident are less likely to hurt other people? Not arrogant, confident.
I understand the difference. I think that if you're talking about like helping children with the sources of their depression or challenges with self-esteem, for every school shooting you have 10,000 kids who don't commit a school shooting but who wish that their classmates were dead, right? And I think that yes, you can try to address those core issues, mental health, and you hear a lot of people who are defenders of guns who say guns aren't the problem. It's our education system. It's our mental health resources. They try to kind of deflect blame from the fact that the child was able to get a firearm, and they say if that child wasn't so messed up and their school had better supported them and was able to prevent the bullying that took place, well, then they wouldn't have ever wanted to do that. Well, I think that, for one thing,
two things can be true at once.
We do put a lot of effort into those things, but it is very, growing up is hard, and that will always be true. And when you have access to a gun, when you know the combination, whether you have fired it or not, whether you feel confident in yourself or not, I don't think that there's really an argument to be made there. The best way to stop school shootings is to make sure that children cannot access guns, which means the guns don't exist in the house. Let me ask you, you own a gun, right?
No, I actually don't.
You don't own a gun.
No one will ever know. I would admit to you off camera whether or not I own a firearm, but I will not admit to it on camera. I don't think that's something you need to be advertising to the world, because number one, people could try and steal them, and number two, the police could come and try and confiscate them should they be one of the many guns that the government has decided should be restricted in the recent years, which, annoyingly enough, is often based off how they look, not based off their functionality.
Interesting. So you may or may not have a gun, secret gun. Your wife, and again, hypothetical.
Assume I have a gun for the purpose of your interrogation.
Right. You won't tell your children that you have a gun, I assume. You would keep it a secret. You'd keep it hidden away. Hypothetically, where would you keep it?
I'm not going to go ahead and say that. Number one, it needs to be in a safe. You think I'm going to tell people if I have a gun, whether or not I have a gun? You think I'm going to tell them where I put it? No, it would need to be in a safe. And I actually know I would tell my children about the fact that there's a firearm in the house once they are a certain age. I would teach them proper safety precautions.
Want their classmates dead?
Like, I hope as a parent you're better at raising your children than that.
Guess what? There's a lot of bad parents out there.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's true. It's pretty sad.
You're a great parent.
Well, thank you. You have no proof of that, though.
I have a little bit of proof. But there are a lot of bad parents out there, right? And I think that we have to accept the reality that there are a lot of people who are out there who will, who are malicious, who will do bad things. And our job as a society, and especially the state, has a responsibility to prevent them from doing those things, right? And I just think that the best way to prevent people from committing crimes, from committing violence, is to have less guns.
Do you know that gun violence is predominantly committed in areas that guns are not allowed to be in, or that they're heavily restricted? Like these democratically run cities like Chicago and Baltimore and Los Angeles, you can't just go out and buy a gun. You can't own a gun just like you can in Texas. Now, maybe Texas is too liberal with how they allow people to have guns. Maybe that's true. I don't know. I don't know exactly what their laws are. But schools, are guns allowed in schools except by police? Do I want guns in schools except by police? No, not really. But
teachers shouldn't carry guns?
I think if you want to be a teacher who carries a firearm, you need massive amounts of training, you need special certifications, and it has to be very well guarded from the children. That would be 1 in 10,000, 100,000 teachers. Like it's not going to be something that's very common, if it's allowed at all.
But do you support?
In the case that I laid out, I would be okay with a teacher having a firearm. If it helps prevent a classroom of kids getting slaughtered, yes. Because if someone comes in with a long rifle, which is usually what school shootings are committed with, having a teacher who's ready because he knows what's going on, and as soon as that door gets kicked in, bam! Yeah, I think that is a good thing.
Once again, I think you're taking a very unlikely and isolated
I don't think so.
example and neglecting the fact that if at any point it is discovered that that teacher has a gun in the school, that the odds of a school shooting happening at that school increase exponentially.
I completely
with the
disagree.
use of that gun.
I completely disagree. Places that have firearms, that have shootings, are typically places that don't have a lot of guns. If you're going to commit violence with a gun, Nick, are you going to go where there's a lot of police with guns, or a place where there are no police with guns? If you're going to shoot up a mall, you're going to shoot up a mall that has 100 police officers who are there, who are heavily armed at all times, or a mall that has 0 police officers with 0 guns? What's the easier target? Who are you going to go for?
Where do police officers not have guns?
The UK? You have to be like SWAT basically to have guns in the UK.
Right, but it's also probably incredibly difficult for a person to get a gun in the UK. You're giving me the example. You're saying in America, right?
Okay, well, just no police. Don't ignore the police without guns. Just no police. Or like, are you more likely to shoot up a mall that is filled with Texans who all have a gun on their hip, or a mall that has a bunch of California liberals? What is the easier target? You are going to attack the place that has less likely of you being stopped. So I think more guns in an area that are in the hands of good people actually prevents violence against those areas.
And I'm saying you're living in fantasy land where only the good people have guns and the bad people don't.
Okay, but Nick, are there more good people than bad people in the world? In North America, we'll say.
Is this what our podcast?
Well, I think it's an important question. Are there more good people or bad people?
I'll play along with your little argument, and I'll say good people.
Okay.
What do you want to do with that?
So, if we'll say 3-1, 4-1, 5-1, whatever it is, there is more good people with guns than there are bad people with guns.
Yes.
So, more good people to stop bad people from doing things with guns.
Right, but okay. I think it's a bit silly, to be honest, and I think that once again we're not basing, or I don't think you are basing your arguments on kind of like larger statistical data, and I don't agree with this idea that people should have guns in their homes, that teachers should have guns in schools.
Okay, I don't think teachers should necessarily have guns,
No,
but our high school had an armed RCMP officer there, and I think that's not a bad thing.
I remember that.
Do you think him being there is a deterrent or more likely cause of a school shooting?
Well, my question would first be, what was the reason for putting him there in the first place? Was there a threat to the school?
I have no idea.
I'd like to know whether there was some kind of threat. Was there a push by parents? Whether was there some kind of
my guess it was provincial. My guess it was provincial policy.
Put an RCMP officer in every school, and if so, is that because there is a rising level of gun violence?
Sure, but then putting him there, doesn't that imply that putting him there is a deterrent?
Right, but it's a deterrent because you have allowed, for example, more guns into your community, right? And that the likelihood of a school shooting happening has increased.
But that police officer doesn't just stop. That police officer wouldn't just stop firearm violence. It could stop knife violence. They could stop gun. It could stop drugs.
There's a lot of examples of school shootings, and I know we're kind of getting specifically into school shootings here, but there are a lot of examples of school shootings where, for example, the police have either already been on the premises or showed up and were not able to actually prevent the shooter from continuing to open fire for a long time, right?
You mean like Uvalde down in Texas?
Like Uvalde, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was absolutely messed up.
Guess what?
Texas, by the way.
Guess what?
The state that you're defending.
Guess what? Those police officers actively chose to do nothing. It wasn't that they didn't go in to stop him because it wasn't they couldn't stop him. They didn't stop him. They chose not to stop him. And what ended up happening, I believe it was an off-duty marshal or something that went in and killed the guy. A good guy with a gun. So yes, a police officer going in stopped the whole thing. When a group of police stood around and did nothing.
After many didn't, exactly.
So
my point is just that having these supposedly trained police officers in a place where guns are very accessible are not necessarily the solution to preventing gun violence.
Because those people were cowards.
Thank goodness there was that guy there.
Those people were cowards. One of the things, if you're going to have an armed community of people, is they have to be willing to use it when they need to. Not when it's fun, when they need to.
Right.
And that marshal or whoever it was needed to go in there to save people's lives, and he did. Those Uvalde police officers are a disgrace to their badge. They should never be allowed to serve again. They're clearly cowards.
Right. And that's not an isolated incident. Right? My point is that you cannot ensure that these good guys, right? Because supposedly these police officers are the good guys, right? And they didn't stop it. Right?
You know what would have helped then? If their teachers would have been armed.
Wouldn't that have been great?
It could have stopped. It could have stopped it sooner. Like, I'm not advocating for that necessarily, but good guys with guns is what stops bad guys with guns. Period. Because otherwise they would just get away 100% of the time, and most times they either take their own life, or they get stopped by a good guy with a gun.
Right. Or in my case, and which is the case in pretty much everywhere in Canada, neither the good guy nor the bad guy has a gun, and no gun violence is committed. People get punched in the face, occasional stabbing.
Gun violence happens in Canada. We had, how many years ago, there was a mass shooter in Nova Scotia who went around with rifles and was killing people.
We had in Quebec, we had the mosque shooting. We had the shooting at Polytechnique. We had a shooting at at Dawson College, which is a CEGEP. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but it happens far less frequently.
And it would happen. It would happen even less frequently if those places had people defending it. If there were guards protecting those places with firearms, those places likely never would have had those incidents.
Okay.
They would have done them. Let's move on to something else, because clearly we're not going to make any headway here.
Yeah, this is a classic situation where I'm clearly not going to change your mind, and vice versa. And we'll let the viewers decide. Share in the comments who you agree with.
All three of you. At least it's an odd number, so we'll know who wins.
Sam, Nick, or Kieran in the chat now. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about? I think the one last thing that I would just like to say really quick is that a lot of the cartel violence and the power of cartels in Latin America comes from the fact that all their guns come from the U.S., right? All their guns
absolutely
are smuggled down into Latin America. That is also true in Canada, by the way. A lot of our guns,
absolutely,
the guns that exist on Canadian streets, are guns that were illegally smuggled up from the United States.
And you know what you're making an argument for, Nick? Better borders. So do you know why the cartels get their guns from the United States? This is actually crazy. Corrupt police officers, sell those guns to cartel members who then drive them into Mexico because Mexico will just let you in. You know, when you think people you think the U.S.-Mexico border, it's like, it's so secure. Not when you're driving to Mexico. When you're driving from the United States to Mexico, right on in. So that's how those guns get in. So if Mexico had a stronger border, those guns wouldn't be able to make it across that border as easily. And the same thing in Canada.
Gun culture wasn't so prominent in the U.S. and they didn't have a huge manufacturing industry where they're literally making guns to satisfy the lust and the craving for guns that exists in the United States, that maybe none of this would be a problem.
And for the protection of people who want to have self-defense. That's why they're made. Yeah, lots of them are sold to people who just love shooting guns, because as we agreed upon earlier, shooting guns is a hell of a lot of fun. But look, the United States has the guns they have. Even if they stopped making them, they still have an obscene amount of guns. So you have to deal with that, right? It's one of those things. It is what it is. You have to move forward from where you are, not from where you'd like to be. And to confiscate guns from people, it involves the government doing violence against those people, because the people are not going to want to give up their guns. And what does the state do when you break a law?
I'm not suggesting that's something that could happen in any kind of imminent future. Although, as a Canadian, what I would like to see in the United States is an acceptance that guns make your people less safe, and that as gun culture diminishes over time, that more people would willingly surrender guns. But that's obviously wishful thinking and not based in reality, and I get that, and I'm not.
That's right. You admit it. Your position is not based in reality.
No,
I'm just teasing you. I'm just teasing.
Is a fair one, and I think that yes, if I could make the decision to have the U.S. stop manufacturing guns, I would, right? Because their military-industrial complex is a huge part of their economy. America, for them, war is a hugely economic or a huge piece of their economy.
Agreed.
And a huge piece of that military-industrial complex is specifically the manufacturing of guns and other assault weapons.
Assault weapons isn't a real thing. But most of that, like the largest portion of that, is not guns being sold to the American people. But anyway, I want to move on, because one of the things that I would like to talk about is I think that a population who have firearms is the ultimate defense against either invasion or their own government going tyrannical against them. If you look at places that have guns, even if it's like a look at the wars that the United States has lost in the last 50, 60 years. Vietnam. You think they would have won? You think they would have lost Vietnam if Vietnam didn't have guys with guns? Just little dudes hanging out in the woods. You think that Afghanistan wouldn't be overrun with the United States military who helped fight them back if they wasn't filled with dudes with guns? I think, do you think that Nazi Germany would have gotten away with what they got away with if every house they went into to try and pull out Jews, there was a Jew waiting with a gun? They never could have gotten away with that.
Okay.
Another example. Taiwan. If Taiwan wants to prevent China from invading them, every man, woman, and not children, every man and woman should have a firearm, so that if the people of China, the People's Army of China, or whatever they call it, as soon as they set foot on their shores, they're bombarded with a hail of bullets that make D-Day look like a walk in the park. Right now, they don't have the right to have guns. So when China decides to take Taiwan, Taiwan will be China's.
Okay. I think that armies are made up of soldiers,
Yes.
not civilians. I think that you're talking about Taiwan and, geopolitical conflicts, where it is armies fighting each other, right?
No, not really.
Soldiers who were drafted to fight in wars and who were procured weapons from their government who, if they needed to get more weapons, could obtain them.
You,
Right?
you think the Taiwanese government could have access to guns that quickly? You think that and then who would they draft? Oh yeah, citizens. So yes,
think that-
an army is made up of citizens.
An army is made up of soldiers who were either chose to fight in the military or who were conscripted, right?
You don't
Brought
need
into the
you don't need to be
Okay.
conscripted to defend your
Right.
country. The people in the United States before it was the United States were not conscripted to fight against the British. They just fought the British because they had guns, and they never would have
Yes.
won that war if they didn't have guns. Or the French. Suck on
but
that,
here-
United States. You wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the French.
You
They're gonna hate that.
you're talking about geopolitical conflicts as though they can be swayed one way or another based on how many guns the civilian population has.
Yes,
Like-
they can.
You don't think America could arm Taiwan like that if they wanted to?
It would
Like,
take.
Of course they
Okay,
could.
who's gonna get there faster? A boat from China or a boat from the United States with guns? What's gonna get to Taiwan faster? If Taiwan already had those guns, that wouldn't be a question.
Not how it works.
Yes, it is.
No, it's not.
Okay,
Kieran.
how is
You're-
the
you're-
how is the
you're-
United States going to get guns to Taiwan faster than China could get men on the ground in China or in Taiwan?
Because that's not how the world works, Kieran.
You're not-
That's not how the world works.
I don't.
Okay,
You're not
listen
making
to
an
me for a second.
argument.
Listen to me for a second, okay? If China is going to invade Taiwan, we're going to know about it before they do it, okay?
Barely.
This is called intelligence.
And we'd have terrible intelligence on what's going on in China. They are the most restrictive country except North Korea for that.
We have lots more intelligence than you realize. First of all, we also are obviously allied with the Taiwanese government. Lots of exchanges of information. That's also, by the way, where we get all our semiconductors. So we have a huge vested interest in
Yes.
economically.
So it would be
But-
terrible if it fell to the Chinese. It's almost as if we should defend it, or they should defend it.
It's not as though, like, look at what happened with Russia and Ukraine, right? That was an incredibly quick attack, and still there were weeks spent where we could see all kinds of Russian military equipment, tanks, soldiers, moving towards the Ukrainian border, right? If China was going to launch an attack on Taiwan, we would know about it far sooner, right? And first of all, it's a very geopolitical thing, right? Where first of all, there's going to be a lot of attempts to dissuade China, where the U.S. and other Western allies, also Japan, also Korea, South Korea, are going to be using tactics, diplomatic, economic tactics, to dissuade any kind of invasion. And second of all, a war doesn't happen in a day, right? Look at what happened in Ukraine. Once again, the U.S. has armed all of Ukraine, right? And not just with guns, but with all kinds of other equipment.
Okay,
right?
Nick,
And
do
there's
you-
been a lot of discussion as to what weapons Ukraine gets. But my point is just that you can't solve, some kind of authoritarian dictator all of a sudden with the snap of their fingers taking control of, some kind of coup. I'm not exactly sure I even understand what you mean by resisting authoritarianism. Like you don't just go around and conquer every city, and the people rise up and fight you. Like I'm just not totally clear.
Okay, I have a question.
What
Do you
the
think
argument is
do you
here.
think Russia would have been more hesitant to invade Ukraine if they had the potential for every household that they passed to be firing at them with guns, which was not the case. They went right by massive amounts of people because they weren't being properly they were being stopped by the army, which is a tiny fraction of the population. What is Canada's army relative to how many adult males there are? It's nothing. So if every adult male in Ukraine
Let me
had a
answer your
gun
question.
in his
Let me
house,
answer your question. It wouldn't have mattered all if every household in Ukraine
They would have
had
been
guns.
they would have been far more
Not at
hesitant.
all.
They would have been far more hesitant. You know how I know this? Do you know how I know this? Because men with guns in slippers pushed the United States out of their country. It's happened more than once.
Are you referring to Vietnam?
And Afghanistan. And Iraq. And Iraq a time before that. Or was it Afghanistan before that? In the 90s. Anyway.
Okay, well, we don't need to go into why the United States lost those wars.
It wouldn't have been a war if those people didn't have guns. It would have been an instant occupation.
I have never heard anyone make the argument, and that the reason that we were not able to win those decades-long wars, by the way, that the reason that we lost those wars is because on day one, every
It's not day one. It's not day
a
one.
gun.
It's the entire time you're there. Think of what
Right, and that's my point.
think about what occupation is.
They already have.
They
the
should have
weapons.
already. Yeah, well, they should, because then they don't need to get them. They don't. Then you don't need to procure them. Then you don't need to get them. They're already there, so you have access to defend yourself. Do you think what Israel is doing in Palestine? Well, there's a ceasefire kind of going on. Do you think what they were doing? They didn't put men on the ground until a long time into that conflict because they were afraid of guys with guns. A tiny fraction of their population, I'll admit. Again, but guys with guns. And if every man in Palestine had a gun, they never would have went in. They would have instead slaughtered the entire people with rockets because they don't care.
Right. That's my point. Is that when you have a superior military with, I must admit, Kieran, I find this argument to be a little bit silly. I fundamentally disagree with this idea that a more heavily armed population, that people living in their houses and having guns of any kind in this day and age, in modern warfare, when we have such crazy air power, right? Like, we are no longer in an era where people just march out onto a field and fight each other.
No, it's not
right?
that simple. Guerrilla insurgency is how every major conflict has happened in recent years until Russia and Ukraine. And it would have gone better for Ukraine if they had guns up the yin yang, so that when the Russians started marching, which they did, they were being fired upon from every household that they went past.
Okay, I disagree.
Anyway. We're another place we're not going to agree on. I think that's pretty obvious, because if I was an army, yeah, I might fire missiles raining down upon them, but they're already doing that, and they're still not annihilating them. Could you imagine how poorly it would have gone if they weren't able to get troops in the way that they were? Because even in the Israel-Palestine conflict, they still had to put boots on the ground eventually. You can't occupy a place without men to occupy. And if you try and occupy with men and they're constantly being bombarded with bullets raining down upon them like nobody's business, you're going to be a lot more hesitant to do that.
I don't understand how you're thinking about this as though let's say the man in the household, when the Russians are invading, just runs out and starts firing on the Russians.
You don't run out. You poke your head out the window and you start firing. You don't just expose your body like that. You stay behind cover.
No, what you do is you try to evacuate your family to a place that is safe.
So give up your land. You give up your land. And then you get drafted and then you've already lost your land. So you've lost the land, and then you're drafted, and then you have to go fight anyway. So why not start fighting? So why not start fighting before?
Just to be clear, what the men should have done in Ukraine, instead of trying to evacuate their families, is hide out in their homes and in places where
their families should have evacuated. The women and children should have been evacuated, but the men should have stayed behind and fought till their deaths. Every single last one of them. Because if you're not willing to die for your country,
And now they would all be dead. And
they are
Ukraine
anyway.
doesn't have an army.
They are anyway. Ukraine has
No, but-
has virtually no young men. The average age of their army is over 40 years old because most of their men have gotten gunned down because the Russians already made it into their country, which they would have been much more hesitant to do if around every corner they were being shot at. You clearly
Works.
no, you clearly don't understand what war is like.
No, I fundamentally don't agree with you, Kieran.
Go
I think
ask anyone who served in any of the conflicts that the United States and Canada has been in the last 20 years. They will tell you the same thing, that you're much more hesitant to go in an area when there might be guys there ready to gun you down. And it doesn't have to be an army, it can just be men who are ready to fight for their country, who are ready to fight for what's right. And whether or not those people evacuate and then come back later only to defend, you've already lost territory. How about you just stay and fight beforehand? Yeah, one guy might get picked off. That's happening anyway. And then you evacuate to a location, and then they can just bomb it instead of having decentralized population shooting down upon you. What's more deadly, 100 guys standing over there, or 100 guys speckled all over that you don't know where those bullets are coming from? You don't know what's safe ground. You don't know where you can hide and not get picked off. Yeah,
You know what?
guys and guns, you're not going to take out a tank. But a tank is pretty useless if they're by themselves.
Yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe you're right, and I don't understand warfare. But I don't know that I can really imagine this playing out in the way that you're describing. I'm not really sure what to say at this point. Yeah, just because I think I have a fundamentally different understanding of how this plays out than you do, and I don't think that it's solved by arming your population.
But you do, because you think that those men should evacuate and then get conscripted. Which is the same thing, it's just with a 2-week delay, where you've already given up land.
Right, and you're fighting as a cohesive unit.
I'm sorry, but you are not a...
Just random guys who are
Cons-
sprinkling bullets
I'm sorry, but
without knowing whether their neighbors are fighting or not.
you're not going to shoot at your neighbor's house. You're going to shoot at the army marching in.
I'm just saying that if I'm a Ukrainian guy, okay, I'm sitting at home and watching whatever, right, on TV with my family, and I haven't already been told that Russia's about to invade, which I have. I'm
Yes.
sure.
So so your family should be already gone, and you should be staying ready, armed.
Right, but there is a 100% certainty in my mind that if we have been told to evacuate, that the order to the men who are all armed, and again, women would probably stick around as well. I don't want to gender it too much, but fighting men and women, right? I cannot imagine that the order is, hey, evacuate your young, your elderly, women, whoever,
Disabled.
but you, armed man, stay where you are and,
Why?
and open fire on the Russians, on their tanks and their planes and
Well, you're not going to fire on their planes,
military
but
equipment, and stay there until you die.
well, you don't just stay there until you die. Like that's not that simple. But you fight back. It's
Yeah, and then you die.
like they are anyway.
Right, but at least they have held the Russians back.
No, they haven't. They've
In the
lost
fight.
so much territory. I already said this. You
But you think
you evacuate,
they would have lost
and
less
then
territory?
yes, I
You think
think
they would have lost less territory if all of them had just fought without any kind of having any sense of what was going on, no plan, no battle lines, no commander, nothing. Just them opening fire and, retreating back and then
Okay,
opening
so
fire. And
I want you to
retreating
picture
back.
this. I want you to picture this. The areas that were first invaded, those guys staying there, constantly fighting. The rest of the guys who are from parts of the country that don't actively have Russians walking through it, they can then come and do all the things that you're talking about, but you already have guys on the front line fighting. So it's you have troops on the ground already instead of waiting 2 weeks and losing kilometers and kilometers of your territory. You're just imagining every guy in the country, but you only, it's where the path the Russians are taking. Those are the guys who are going to start fighting from their homes when the rest of the country is going to do the things that you're talking about. So you still have your army that's being accrued. You still have the army that's getting ready, making battle plans. It's just you already have guys on the front line fighting, which is what you would want. You want guys there from the beginning, fighting back from the beginning. It could be 100 guys. 100 guys taking out as many Russians as they can is better than those 100 guys waiting and then coming back 2 weeks later to less territory than they already had. And then the Russians see an army coming, so they're more prepared for it. Instead of chaos. Chaos is a scary thing. Bullets flying at you from all directions, that's not something you want to be in. Those Russians would have been far, far more hesitant to just march into a country if they knew that every man and woman, theoretically, was going to be pelting them with bullets. I guarantee it. Yeah, tanks, armored utility vehicles, those things are a lot harder to deal with, but those are hard to deal with anyway. The army that is your backup, they will come along and deal with the heavy vehicles, the tanks and the armed vehicles. But you still need guys on the ground.
Maybe you're right, Kieran. Maybe you're right.
Okay. I love hearing those words. So, thanks for stopping by, folks.
Say hello to my little friend.